one thing I would say about the conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is that it's pretty rich that you have the ADL and AIPAC trafficking in that idea and conflating those two things, because that's an anti-Semitic trope. I mean, anti-Semites are the ones who like to call Jews Zionists. They use the word Zionist as a shorthand for Jews. They're the ones who talk about the dual loyalty trope, which suggests that, you know, American Jews will never be fully loyal to America because, well, I mean, I'm not really fully loyal to the American government, obviously, but that's another issue. But the idea being that you're not a real patriot, or that you're going to be concerned with the interests of Israel if you're a Jew. So it's really dangerous that in this age of actual anti-Semitism and kind of increased white right-wing, alt-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist violence, that you have the ADL and the AIPAC both perpetuating an anti-Semitic stereotype, but also kind of both sidesing anti-Semitism and saying, well, on the right, you have people who shoot up synagogues, but on the left, you have people who support BDS. And it's just disgusting and cynical. And they don't really care about the safety of Jews. They care about Israel.
Oh, and yeah, I think that's really a really good point, because if you think about when instances of anti-Semitism, sometimes in the West, according to the ADL, by the way, go up, it's oftentimes when Israel's carrying out some sort of operation. And then people are reacting to that because you have a country equating itself with the Jewish people. I mean, I'll tell you, as somebody who's from families from Lebanon, actually, let me tell this story first. A few years ago, the ADL did a survey in the West Bank. A survey that they said demonstrated how Palestinians in the West Bank are anti-Semitic. And if you looked at the questions on that survey, it was things like, do you think Jews have too much power? Now, if you were to ask somebody in America that and they answered, yes, I do, then yes, that would be like an anti-Semitic trope.
Right.
But if you're going to ask people who are literally living under occupation by an army that calls themselves the army of the Jewish state and literally has the Star of David like on its tanks and on its uniforms, then, I mean, that's just insane. That's just cruel to then point the finger at these people and say they're bigoted because they think Jews in an apartheid country that literally privileges Jewish people and like gives you fewer rights if you're not Jewish, that's anti-Semitic. That's insane. And like, I remember, and the same goes for even a place like Lebanon or across the Middle East. I mean, a lot of people in countries across the Middle East have very negative views about the Jewish faith because they associate it with a country that bombs them. I remember when I was a kid and I was like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years old. I was visiting Lebanon for like the first time in my life. And we were drawing, me and my cousin were like sitting around, like coloring and drawing. And I drew like a star. And the only way I knew how to draw a star was to draw 2 triangles. And I remember my aunt came into the room and she was like so horrified because I drew a Star of David. And like, that's the mentality of people in the region towards symbols of Judaism because of Israel, because it has it on the flag. So if we want to talk about what perpetuates the kind of anti-Semitism that the ADL, despises so much, if they actually cared, they would find it very problematic that there is a very aggressive apartheid country using the symbol of a religion to characterize and identify themselves. And then acting very aggressively towards people around the world, and then conflating any criticism of that country with Jewish people. I mean, it's like, that's the conversation that should be a part of the anti-Semitism conversation. And it's not, because a lot of these organizations, like Katie said, don't actually care. They don't actually care about anti-Jewish bigotry.
What's interesting is I saw somewhere recently, and it was the head of, I don't know if it was the AIPAC, the PAC, or it was the head of AIPAC, but said, we're not about Jews. That's not what we're about. Well, then if you're not about Jews, then people that disagree with you aren't anti-Semitic.
Right.
You can't have it both ways. Like, if somebody is going to claim to represent Judaism, then do so. But they're not doing that at all. Like, that's not at all what they're doing. And my question for you, Rabbi, this is my big issue, is that the fear that I was raised with, that post-Holocaust fear-based mentality, as if we don't have Israel, we have nothing. The Jews are, that's it, we're screwed. And the fear is not irrational, right? Like, it's a very rational fear, but then it loses its logical conclusion to having a national Jewish state will now keep us safe. Like, that's where the line can't logically be connected from a rational fear. I mean, how do you explain to people that even though it's realistic to be fearful of anti-Semitism, having the state is not the solution to that?
Well, the simple answer is, are we more safe with the existence of the state of Israel? You know, Zionism, classical Zionism, held that once there was a state of Israel, anti-Semitism would disappear. That was the answer to anti-Semitism. And, you know, the irony of all of this is that Israel really depends on anti-Semitism for its raison d'etre. It needs to justify its existence because of anti-Semitism in the world. So I would say to people like that, well, what is the part of the world where Jews feel the most unsafe? You know, let's look at the state of Israel. You know, yes, there has been an alarming rise of anti-Semitism around the world, but Israel is an over-militarized garrison state. You know, that Israel has become the focus of Jewish fear. So I would simply ask people, do you feel that we're more safe for having the state of Israel in existence? You know, the other contradiction is that, you know, I believe it is anti-Semitic to associate all Jews with the state of Israel and the actions of the state of Israel. Absolutely.
Great.
But you know what? Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Israel, by its very existence, associates itself with all Jews throughout the world. It is the state for the Jews. So we are all implicated, whether we want to be or not, in everything Israel does. So Israel can't have it both ways. They can't complain about the anti-Semitism when you know, people associate Jews everywhere with its actions, but then, you know, somehow, you know, try to claim that they are the voice and the home, national home for all Jews throughout the diaspora. It's
I mean, it's like the Islamic State, like in what that did to Muslims around the world. It's like,
so I look at my congresswoman calling out anti-Semitism, and I'm like, no, she's not anti-Semitic. You're an Islamophobe. You're seeing this whole thing wrong. So my Gaisha friend here puts this up, not realizing that it was somewhat rhetorical. But I just think it was kind of funny. So it says, Rabbi Rosen, given the self-evident apartheid and collective punishment of the Palestinians, if the Israeli state doesn't recognize the long-term consequences of this behavior, shouldn't they be sent back to shul?
Whatever that means.
He thought it was like a question. I'm like, no, that's rhetorical.
Yes, I think it's a statement more than a question.
Yeah.
I would depend on what shul we're talking about, right? I mean,
yours in particular, but I mean, one of the things that really spoke to me a lot in this, seriously, my mom is now like reading this to my father. This is very important, is how much you focus on what really being Jewish is. And that to me, it really gave me this sense of, look, Judaism has existed long before Zionism and it's going to exist long after it. Like that was sort of this almost thought that I had, like really disconnecting them. But the fact that you say all of these things that you're saying are actually Jewish tradition, more so than what the state of Israel is doing, saying, oh, this is a Jewish state, isn't based on Jewish principles. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, you hear a lot today, you know, when we're going back to the issue of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, this conflation with Zionism, which is a modern nationalistic movement that was part of many different modern nationalistic movements that were going on at the turn of the century, right? It's just, this has happened to be one that emerged in Western Europe, in the Jewish world around the turn of the century, was a radical break with what Judaism had been up until that point. Consciously, I mean, it negated the diaspora. It said that Jews needed to go back to the land and create a sovereign state for the Jews, which was something that was absolutely forbidden according to traditional Judaism. That could only happen when the Messiah came. You know, it was a radical break with everything that Judaism had been. And what's amusing to me is just really, you know, half a century later, we're now saying that Zionism and Judaism are one and the same. So we need to really, and by the way, I want to say that it's not necessarily a modern Jewish movement that breaks with traditional Judaism. It's not in and of itself a bad thing, right? I mean, I'm a liberal Jew. I'm part of a modern Jewish movement that breaks with traditional Judaism as well. I think the issue is what it has created. What is it advocating for? It's advocating for an ethno-national, exclusively Jewish state in historic Palestine, which is a place that has always been multi-ethnic and multi-religious. and has created a Jewish majority state that had to dispossess other people in order to exist. And that is counter to just about every Jewish value that I could list for you. I would argue that it's actually, from a Jewish values point of view, quite un-Jewish. I wouldn't deny the Jewishness of those who are Zionists. I just say that that's not the Judaism that we should be upholding in the world.
The Tikkun Olam.
Absolutely. Tikkun Olam is a central Jewish ethic of healing the world. I don't think ethno-national militarized states are involved in Tikkun Olam.
Neither do I.
So in this book, just for anybody who doesn't realize, this is the rabbi it was a blog that you started in 08 or 09, and you printed the blog and the discussions that followed, which is really interesting, like watching certain people like parrot certain talking points and just go back and forth. But it's really very interesting how different people view what does that mean to be Jewish. It's very, very different for a lot of people and what that means. But I feel like at its core, we should kind of agree that it doesn't mean it's okay to oppress another group of people. Right? Like there should be a certain basic sense. And yet you are like more considered like fringe by the people like in this, then really it's just common sense.
Well, it's like Rashida Tlaib saying you can't be progressive and support apartheid. You just can't do it.
They
it's
say
not possible.
Apartheid. They refuse to hear that. They refuse to hear that. And even saying that is sacrilegious. You know what I mean? Like you can't.
Well, this is our generation's South Africa.
So B'Tselem is an anti-Semitic organization then.
That's what I keep pointing to. Right. It's a cabal of self-loathing Jews.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.